It's the Real Estate Podcast, brought to you by ANZ Home Loans for financial well-beings.
Hey, welcome back to the Real Estate Breakfast for our non-stop marathon all the way around our 2025 year of real estate. Just look at that date, August the 30th. Back into another weekend as we break down for you the Australian property market. Always something is on the go. Thank you too for the many emails that we are getting every week. A lot of them just letting us know where you are listening to us in the world from. Not everybody, of course, is in Australia. Got a lot of expats everywhere. And you can also leave us a voice message. This is our new service that we're now providing. And you'll find the link to record below in the show notes. Well, here is something that is a bit of an issue right across Australia, as highlighted by Domain yesterday, and that is that residents of Queensland's Sunshine Coast are outraged as caravans, camper vans, and also boats line suburban streets, often for weeks or months at a time. Now, the locals say that the oversized vehicles, they're blocking parking, creating safety hazards, and even risk cutting off emergency access. More than 1,000 people have signed a petition urging the Mayor and the Council to impose strict time limits or ban roadside storage entirely. The Council, however, says that the issue is complex, which might be code for they are powerless. But this is where tight covenants on newer suburbs around Australia really has sorted out this issue. So owners have to then store their boats or their camper vans off-site. You can't have them in the street. So right now, let's catch up with Scott Mitchell from Mitchell's Realty. He is in Queensland. And Scott, welcome back to the Real Estate Breakfast. Ironically enough, this is something that you've had to deal with yourself.
Yeah, certainly, Craig. Good morning, mate. Most will know we've talked about it in Hervey Bay. Sometimes sheds and caravans, boats and RVs are more important than the houses in Hervey Bay. Only last week, we were shooting a prestige property that was adjoining council-owned parkland, and then the neighbour adjoining that, which was a half-acre property, they had a family gathering and they had 7 caravans set up at the rear of their property. And it did look like a bit of a shanty town. So when you're marketing a prestige property and we're shooting with a drone, looking back across, I think any prospective buyer would have looked at that and gone, what's going on with the 7 caravans in the back of that property? So we spoke to those owners and they explained that it was a family gathering and we would have to just wait for them to leave. So we postponed our marketing for a week because the council, whilst we spoke to them about it, these vehicles are being parked on that owner's private property. And there's nothing saying that they can't do that. But the owners were good about it in the end, and they gave us the date that all the vans and RVs were leaving, and we just postponed our marketing until we could shoot that marketing without all that sitting in the backyard.
Yeah, you don't want a gypsy-looking setup if you've got the drone trying to take those real estate photos. Now, the other thing, too, to look out for some of these prefabs. The other day, the street that I do drive in from time to time, I see one of these prefabs, one of these one-bedroom prefabs sitting in the driveway. So they obviously couldn't lift the prefab around to the back of the property, and it's just sitting in front of the driveway. They can't even get their car into the garage. So, yeah, there's some very strange things that are happening around residents in Australia. Now, something else that could be called strange is the new Form 2, the seller's disclosure regime, which came into effect 1st of August, was it, Scott?
It certainly was, yeah. We sort of just skipped it on that last podcast. We wanted to get our heads around what was going to be involved. So from the 1st of August, every single seller, whether they're on the market prior to that or not, and obviously after the 1st of August, every single seller in Queensland is now required to complete and sign off on the new Form 2 seller's disclosure. And this document is so critical that we cannot enter into any negotiations around that property or secure the contract on that property or an offer without first providing that Form 2 to any prospective purchaser.
And just how much of a problem has this been for you in terms of making the adjustment? Because everybody right across the border has got to do exactly that in Queensland.
Correct. Look, it was a frustrating 3 weeks really leading up to today because you've got to appreciate every single seller in the whole state of Queensland had to complete this from the 1st of August. Whether they're on the market or about to go on the market, they had to go and download these documents and complete them. And the document was not made available even for downloading until that day, the 1st of August. Our advice was to seek legal advice for each of our clients. They should go back through their solicitor or at least their conveyancer and ask for assistance in completing this form to ensure that they got it correct. And that's an additional cost to these sellers as well. Most of the solicitors across the board in Hervey Bay have been charging between $500 and $600 to assist any potential seller in completing this document. And there is a couple of mandatory searches that every seller must provide, and that is a title search, which we would have done under standard process anyway, and a survey plan, which is certainly not something I did expect to see as a mandatory document.
I can hear the frustration in your voice, and you also want to make mention of New South Wales and Victoria and perhaps the difference between all three now.
Yeah, certainly. Look, this type of legislation, like a seller's disclosure, has been in effect in New South Wales and Victoria for more than a decade. In Victoria, they refer to it as a Section 32 statement, and in New South Wales, I believe it's just a seller's disclosure. And in both cases, the sellers at their expense must provide all of the material facts around their property, including a building and pest inspection report up front. So at the seller's expense in the other states, the sellers generate or have those building and pest reports done, and they are also provided. But here in Queensland, under this new regime, the sellers are not required. So the buyer still needs to, if they wish to, carry out or conduct their own building and pest inspection reports as they would have done previously.
And it is a Saturday. We are talking to Scott Mitchell there in Hervey Bay on the Fraser Coast, and we'll have more after this.
From the emotion of property, the economic inflation, managing your expectations, lack of stock, price growth, construction appetite, days on the market. Stay informed with us and know your property.
Now, you have worked through previous boom-bust cycles for over 21 years in the Melbourne real estate market. I want to ask you, what makes the current surge in Point Cook particularly different from past cycles?
Yeah, well, I think what's happening in Point Cook, and it probably goes for most parts of Melbourne, is it's different from past surges because it's not driven just by emotion or speculation. It's driven by fundamentals. In past booms, we've seen rapid investor speculation, obviously loose lending and government stimulus overheating the market. Yes, we have a little bit of that in this market as well, but there's organic demand. So that comes from population growth at record highs. And Melbourne's leading the way. Interest rates are obviously coming down, like we touched on before, bridging the gap between rental repayments and mortgage repayments. So it's increasing borrowing power and allowing more buyers to get into the market. And housing supply is at historical lows. That's the difference that we're seeing today. And people are genuinely also needing homes rather than just buying homes to flip or do anything like that. So we're seeing families and first home buyers wanting to get into the market so they've got, I guess, a roof over their head and long-term security.
You're listening to the Saturday Property Market Update.
And another busy weekend lined up right around Australia with property. Plenty of auctions taking place. If you are attending one of those, good luck. And we are talking to Scott about this disclosure, this new disclosure form. And I should just highlight that this statement does not include information about flooding or other natural hazard history, structural soundness of the building or pest infestation, as Scott mentioned before the break, current or historical use of the property, current or past building or development approvals for the property, also limits imposed by planning laws on the use of the land, and services that are or may be connected to the property. So there's a number of things that are not included.
Yeah, that's correct, Craig. Unless a property, if it's a standard sort of standalone, freestanding property like a house and land, established or new build, there's not going to be a lot of call to do any extraordinary searches, I'm going to call it. But if you're in an area that there's so many different variations, if you're near an airport, you can have noise attenuation, you can have green corridors, you could have bushfire overlays, you can have storm surge mapping, you can have flooding, as we've seen in the particular last 6 months across Queensland. So none of those searches are covered under this regime as mandatory. So a buyer still has a responsibility. If they have concerns around any of those areas, they will still need to generate their own searches or include a special condition covering them to provide those searches and satisfy them.
All right, and let's have a look at something that is included, and that is the unlicensed building work under owner-builder permit building work being carried out on the property under an owner-builder permit in the last 6 years. So there is that, Scott, and also the Body Corporate and Community Management Act of 1997.
Correct. Yeah, that's right, Craig. Then the uncertified items across Hervey Bay, like I could almost say about every second shed doesn't have a final approval. And it's a lot of the time was never through the owner's fault. A lot of time these shed companies would complete a reasonable structure, like a large shed, carport, awning, and then they give the final document to the owner, and maybe they didn't quite clarify that it was the owner's responsibility to lodge that with council. And then 10 years in, whilst it was all built to code and surveyed as far as the document goes, it was never lodged with council. So it'll come up on a search as being an unregistered structure. To get that certified now, there's no certifiers in council. So then it's the owner's responsibility to go and get a private certifier. And that can open a whole can of worms. And again, it's an additional expense and a lot more work. So we see uncertified or unapproved structures on properties across Hervey Bay often. And then the owner builder, we were always required to disclose that anyway, providing it was less than that 6 to 7 year period. Anything after that, we didn't have to in any case. And this document now highlights the fact that the seller must disclose that as one of the tick box questions, and they've got to sign off on that. So I think they're positive moves. And then in relation to body corporate and unit structures, we've got to provide the body corporate disclosure information in any case. And this will just take that a step further and provides really good information to a prospective buyer. And body corporates can be a complex item. So I think that is a positive move going forward.
All right, so those are some of the key takeaways with the new Form 2, the seller's disclosure regime, which came into effect, and it has made everybody scramble a little bit. Thank you for all of that, Scott. Have a great weekend, maybe out on the boat fishing.
Yeah, look, mate, the barramundi fishing at Lake Mondrian, which is about an hour and a half from Hervey Bay to our north, has been fantastic. And as this weather warms up and we finally get out of winter, I hope, I'm looking forward to doing a bit more of that, Craig.
Explore new property destinations where you could live with exclusive interviews covering real estate news and market insights.
This scheme has been in place since the Morrison government, so what we should do is go through some of the detail, especially for those who are not across this. First off, what are the changes that will come into effect on October the 1st?
The main changes to the scheme, essentially lowering the barriers to entry. There'll now be no income caps. There's changes to the pricing caps. Each state has a property price cap that has increased, and there is now unlimited access. Has become a lot easier for first home buyers.
Yeah, so Goodna is located 25 to 30 minutes out from Brisbane CBD. It's one of those suburbs that were, is a very quiet suburb. Demographic has started to change, hence why we're seeing the growth in the area. Properties in Goodna during the COVID period, it was still very slow. We weren't seeing that boom that everywhere else was seeing. Goodna was the last to come up. It's one of those areas that we're seeing a lot of people from the north side of Brisbane come in, Brisbane CBD. They can't afford necessarily out those ways.
We connect you to the best real estate information across Australia. The Real Estate Podcast.